So far, I've limited myself to restoring or refurbishing or tearing down Heathkit test equipment. And for the most part, it's been my own personal test equipment from way back when, just to get it all running properly and cleaned up again. However, I did want a daily driver radio to listen to, just a simple AM radio. Originally, I thought, okay, maybe I could just go find some old All-American 5 thing and refurbish it like everybody else has. Okay, I could have done that. Then I was looking around the bay and I came across this, which is the Heathkit AJ21. Obviously, this is an AM mono tuner. There is no amplifier. So is it a radio? Yeah, but there's no speaker and there's no final amp. So I said, should I do this? And then I thought about it and said, yeah, I think what I want to do is a Heathkit AM, a Heathkit radio of some kind as opposed to some other brand, for a few reasons. First of all, Heathkits typically were very easy to build and rather easy to repair because they're extremely well documented. The schematics, the theory of operation, everything's in the manual. So if you can find a manual, and there's actually some rather good sources of manuals out there, you can fix a Heathkit radio or Heathkit anything else, because after all, it was designed for pretty much hobbyists to build. So I settled on this AJ21 AM tuner, which would leave the question of, well, how do I actually listen to it? Do I have to go out and buy an amplifier, or do I just go through the aux input of a Bluetooth speaker, which would look kind of incongruous? And then the light bulb hit, and I realized I already have a mono amplifier in the form of my Heathkit signal traces, which you'll see later. And so that will be the amp and speaker for when I want to listen to this. And this will be a daily driver. So in this video, we're going to go through, I'll show you how the thing came pretty much out of the box. It was in fairly sad shape, but I kind of like it that way because no one had been in it. And we'll go through all of the sections and what I did to bring the thing back to life electrically and to a great extent, but not totally cosmetically. I did what I could. I'm not a professional restorer. I have some nice spray paint, which I used on my signal tracers and other Heathkit stuff. So you'll see what I did to make it look rather presentable, and certainly working to the point where it can just stay on and work all the time. One last thing, take a note in this. This picture is out of the manual, and just take a note of the volume and tuning knob style, because later on in the video, I thought the knobs that came with my unit were original in some way, and they're not. Thank goodness, as you'll see. So this was the style of the original knobs which would have come with this tuner. So without further ado, let's delve in and have a look.
Here's the Heathkit AJ-21 High Fidelity AM Tuner. This was a find on eBay. It was quite inexpensive. I don't even remember if it was sold, not working here for parts or just not mentioned at all. As you'll see, it really doesn't matter because this one's in pretty rough shape. First thing that strikes me unpacking this was that the volume knob works. At least it seems to click. And the tuning knob actually does seem to move the dial. So that's a good start. I don't want to move it too much because we don't know what we're doing inside of this. But these are the fuggliest knobs I've ever seen on anything. And these knobs come off. From looking at online pictures of the AJ21, it seems like these are original knobs, although this one's obviously missing its insert. I suspect I'm going to replace these with something a little bit more aesthetic, even if these were original. So I'll put those aside for the moment. Apart from that, The dial glass looks reasonable. We won't touch it too much because we don't know what shape the paint is in. The front panel and the rest of it, the paint here is in rough shape. A shame that this Heathkit logo has faded over the years. That's supposed to be red. If I am able to clean this up without hurting this lettering and this model AJ21 lettering too much, what I think of doing is making a transparent decal of the original Heathkit logo, perhaps, and then applying it over here. We'll see. Apart from that, the front panel here is actually okay. It's just dirty. But the case top is in quite rough shape. This is going to be a candidate for stripping, priming, and repainting, and perhaps a nicer shade of something. This is this bezel here. We'll see. That's part of the overall front with this. I'll try cleaning it up. I don't particularly like the color, but I'll live with it if it comes out clean. And here's the front bezel, which I'll just put in its where it normally goes. This is not two-tone. This is grime. So the front part is how it should look, and the back part, which is dark, is 70 years of accumulated something. And I went at it here with a Q-tip and some isopropyl. And you think, oh, cleans up easy. Well, not really. Just getting this part back to the back under to where the paint is, under the grime, took about 2 minutes of very vigorous scrubbing with a Q-tip and isopropyl. I'll see if there's some other solvent which can do a better job. But frankly, the whole thing is not in the best of shape. So maybe what I will do is blast it, sand it, and simply respray it in a nice cream color. And that'll probably make it be nicer. Here's the dial plate. It's plastic or plexiglass. I'm going to guess that it's rather brittle by now. However, its paint on the back, which is on the back side, is in perfect condition, which is very nice. Obviously, it's a bit dusty, but just looking at it, there's no scratches or anything. So this will clean up perfectly and beautifully. And I'm very happy about that. Of course, when I clean the back side, I want to be super extra careful not to clean the ink right off the plate. But it should look good, unless I screw up. Moving to the rear, there's no back to the rear, and I don't think there's not intended to be one on the AJ21 because the ferrite AM antenna sticks out from the back, which is okay. I mean, this looks like a chunky enough ferrite that maybe we'll get decent reception out of this thing. At least it came after the days where Heathkit would have you build a coil of wire as an AM antenna and stick it to the wall. I guess they hadn't invented ferrite antennas, but this one is built in, and its connections seem at least existent. So there's hope for that at least. By the way, this is a tuner. This is not a receiver. There's no amp in here. So these two this is ground. This is external antenna in if you want one. And then there's two RCA jacks, and that's it. That's the output, one of which is a line level output that is irrespective of the volume control in the front. And the other one is also a line level output, but which is controlled by the volume level. So depending on whether your amp has its own volume or not, you can pick one or the other. The fuse holder is missing its top. Never mind its fuse. That's okay. Apart from that, it looks in good shape. This line cord is really crusty. Good old Heathkit 2-wire line cord. This is almost certainly original, non-polarized, but it's crusty enough that I can't even undo it. And even if I did, I would never plug this in because this. So what we're going to do right away, just to get the line cord out of the way, is to put the line cord out of its misery. Snip. Great. Now at least no one will plug it in, and this can go in the recycle bin. So opening, that's the rear of the unit. And we can see tubes with their shields and some IF transformers. And the good news is there's a power transformer. I checked with an online schematic. This is not a hot chassis rig. They would not make it a hot chassis rig because all of the chassis and all of this would be live. So no, it's transformer operated, and from what I can tell, there's no connection from line to chassis through any capacitors or anything else. It goes straight through the fuse, the power switch, and to the transformer. Taking the case off, we've got our work cut out for ourselves here. The annoying thing is the main tuning pulley here is a little bit rusty. But I'll have to take that apart. The tuning string is intact. In fact, there's a tuning flywheel of sorts, and that does move the tuning knob and does move the pointer and the pulley. So at least that much tuning works, but again, I'm not going to force this too much because it all seems very fragile. Since I want to take this pulley off to remove all the rust, I'll have to unstring this, but at least I can see that the stringing is pretty straightforward. Just two little idler pulleys here, the tuning control here and a pulley, and the main capacitor tuning pulley here with its spring looks okay, but again needs to have rust removed. Hopefully that won't break on me. So far so good. The other nice thing I noticed is the actual tuning capacitor is nice and shiny, so it does not seem corroded at all. I wouldn't say it looks new, but it looks new-ish. That's good. We have the main electrolytic here, a 3-section, nothing too exotic, 100 at, can we read it? Everything's at 250 volts. So a 3-section capacitor, 100 mics, 40 and 40. And max operating temperature 85 degrees C, if that's fine. We'll replace all that with perhaps an adapter cap, which takes that place if it fits, or a socket, or some way to just put three capacitors next to each other right there and wire them in. So that's not a problem. There's a power transformer, a little bit rusty. Hopefully none of its windings are shot, because that would put a damper on things, but we'll buzz that out when the time comes. And then, of course, the chassis itself is pretty filthy from its years of just sitting somewhere. But if we probably wind up taking everything we can apart and cleaning it. I'll want to do a light bulb, a dim bulb, obviously isolated transformer, variac power-up of this as it is, of course, with a power connection going into it, just to see how it feels, if there's any audio coming out of here at all. The lights light up. There's a couple of dial lights. By the way, there's a slide switch here. It sure feels crusty. That lets you select whether you want. It lets you select a trade-off of, I believe, sensitivity versus tone or something, bandwidth versus sensitivity. Because remember, this is a high-fidelity AM tuner. If we just pull some shields off, at least all the tubes are there. I don't have a tube tester, but we can at least see if their filaments are all there. If not, these don't seem to be hard to replace if the need arises. The shields all work. And I can read some of the tubes. I mean, one of them has to be probably a rectifier, local oscillator, mixer, IF, maybe a small driver, who knows. 12 AU7, trying to read, they're actually labeled 6 BA6, 6 BE6, and this one I can't read for some reason, but these don't look too exotic, so that's not bad. So one, two, three, four, 1, 2, 3, 4 tubes. Okay, so which is if you don't have a audio, if you don't have a speaker output, that's really the bare minimum you need. So yeah, we'll find the schematic later and have a look. And for the heck of it, here's the dial cord and its little retaining spring that you would normally get mounted to the pulley, and then the pointer and the other end of the string, which also gets mounted to the pulley. I'm probably gonna replace this dial cord. Why not? I have some, but I'll be careful when removing the pointer from the string, because I have to bend up that center piece here, which clamps the pointer to the string, and I don't want to fatigue that and break it. So it just needs to be just have to be a little careful. But the pointer itself is in beautiful shape.
Because Heathkit, naturally the manual shows us a dial cord string diagram, which will help us put this all back together. Notice the 3 turns on the dial shaft, and there is actually a flywheel on that dial shaft, which we'll take a look at right now.
Here's the tuning knob shaft. Squeak, squeak. Not much of a bearing here, just a circlip that's holding it in place. Give that a bit of a lube. Hopefully cleaning the lube, that'll clean that up. A little flywheel will help. And the dial cord gets strung 3 times around that little area there. And then the knob goes on, and that's how you tune it. Transformer here has a little flaking going on, but it is not punctured or anything. It's just dirt and rust. Maybe we'll give that a little bit of a clean. Flipping things over, there is an under panel to this, which is good. I've removed the screws. The feet are these are screw-on feet. Not that it would be a problem if they weren't in good shape, but they're in surprisingly good shape. So if I clean up the back panel, I'll just unscrew the feet and reuse them. Yeah, they're just held on with nuts, so they have built-in captive screws. This under panel will need a serious cleaning on its underside. And here's the guts or the radio in all their glory. So from what I can tell, here's the tuning capacitor. I was fooling with its flywheel, so it does seem to move freely, which is good. It'll get a little bit of tender love. Here's the 3-section capacitor. Yeah, it's just strange. It's like held on with like a clamp of some kind and some standoffs. I have to see. Or it looks like it's... Yeah, it looks like there's a clamping down onto the onto the bottom of it. Anyway, we'll see what we can do with that. I'd like to see if there's an adapter-cap, which is basically a little tiny PC board in that shape, which can hold 3 capacitors and match the footprint and screw holes. We'll see if we can get one of those. Otherwise, there's plenty of other ways of mounting 3 capacitors, so they're popping out of that hole. I'm not a fan of, I'm not the kind who insists on keeping the original can in place for authenticity. Yeah. Here's the remnants of the line cord going into the fuse holder. Fine, that'll have to go and be replaced. Not seeing too many caps here. This here, whoops. I have to see what this is. At first glance, it actually looks like a diode, which would not make any sense. No. Well, yes, it would. It's because it's coming off of one of the windings, one of the secondary windings of the transformer. And I'm going to bet that that's the high voltage winding. This is the filament winding, which is going to a light bulb, as well as all the filaments, I think. So this could be a rectifier going into this one of the capacitor sections, probably the large one, as a smoothing cap. So that's interesting. That makes this a hybrid tuner. It's not just tube, it has a solid state rectifier. Interesting. We'll be testing all of these other dropping resistor. All of these dropping resistors have probably migrated upwards. And we'll look at most of the other composition resistors. Moving along, what do we got here? We got a lot of disc capacitors. We have the IF transformers. Hopefully they're in good shape. We'll try and test them at least to see if they're not open or anything. Resistors, a lot of disc capacitors. That's fine. Moving along, another IF. Here we have some paper caps. This one is 0.01 at 400, fine. These are the two blocking capacitors which are going to the RCA outputs to isolate whatever it is you do plug into here from any voltage on the set. Those will be replaced in the event they're leaky paper things. So those will be replaced, and there's one other paper cap. Bumblebee hiding. Oh no, it's just a paper cap hiding under there, which is going to be a pain to get to. Ugh. We'll see. If the I don't know, I may rebuild this thing from scratch, simply to be able to get all the parts out. I don't know yet. It really depends. This, where does that go? That's this two conductor thing here, coming off an IF. Where's he going? Oh, he's going up to that slide switch that selects, yeah, okay. We'll find that on the schematic. This is going to the slide switch that selects, I think, sensitivity over fidelity or something like that. And that's all she wrote. So we'll do a few things first. We'll just do some basic resistance checks and just check the transformer for its windings. Make sure none of them are open. It looks like there's just two secondaries and one primary. So it's not a split. You cannot wire this for 110 or 220 like you can some Heathkit test equipment. There's just one primary winding. So obviously for 110, keeps it simpler. And then there's two secondaries, green and red, which appear to have a common lug there. So okay, yeah. And it doesn't look like there's nothing on the primary is going to the chassis, which is good. Well, that's about all she wrote. Looks promising. It'll be interesting to see if anything comes out of it when we do our first dim bulb test, just pretty much as is, to see if anything blows up or catches fire. So here's the underside of the AJ21. You cleaned it up just a tiny bit. I got rid of the remnants of the line cord and its grommet. I also took out the fuse holder because it was missing its cap. Unfortunately, the replacement fuse holder I have, its diameter doesn't fit into the old fuse holder hole. So what I might have to do, I might have to remount this hole to fit this diameter. I would rather not do that because I don't like modifying Heathkit chassis. So I'm going to do my best to look my darndest for a fuse holder with the smaller thread diameter. We'll see. So having removed the line cord and the fuse holder and a little bit of the wiring, I'm feeding the primary of the transformer straight out of my isolated Variact dim bulb current limited AC supply. And that's working well. A couple of things. These two resistors here, this 330 I think it is, and then this 1K resistor. These are the dropping resistors for the B plus into the two filter cap sections. These are running quite hot, especially the 1K. Heathkit lists them as 1 watt resistors. They look beefier than that, and they feel like they're dropping more. I'm going to probably substitute those with official 2 watt resistors and see what happens. Apart from that, of course, the electrolytics here are going to go. This, the can of electrolytics, put a terminal strip and replacements here. What else? On this side, this is the output side. Here are the 2 phono jack outputs. One of them goes through the volume control and the final audio amp. The other one is goes direct without the volume, without the final amplification and without the volume control. So you would feed this into I guess a line level. They're both officially line level, but it really one goes through the an extra amplification stage. And those are fed by these tubular caps here, which are probably going to be replaced, as well as this 0.01 here, another 0.01 hiding down there. So I'll recap, at the very least, those four caps. Although the unit is working fine with just a little bit of hum, probably due to the electrolytics on the power supply here aging a bit. And finally, these phono jacks I'm going to reuse, probably replace these screws with nice shinier stainless ones. So clean up the phono jacks with some sandpaper, make them shiny. Right now the output of this I'm just clipping onto it and is going into my T12 signal tracer, which is acting as a speaker. Contact. I did check all the tubes. They at least light up. One of the bulbs is burnt out. These are the dial bulbs. These are number 47 lamps. This one works. This one was working, but burnt out on me, so those are easy enough to replace. So let's listen in. There we go. So perhaps you can hear this. Here's the T12. And I think I'll just use this. Turn it down. I'll just use this as my speaker for the AJ21. After all, the IT12 is tube based as well, and I'll make up a little cable which goes from phono to BNC, and that'll be that. So here's the AJ21's chassis after all the work put into it. It is now in working condition. So if I can plug it in, plug my amp in, and it plays just fine. A little bit of a tour. The original volume control, after a good spritzing with contact cleaner, it turns out that not only the power switch part, but the potentiometer part works perfectly with no scratchiness, no nothing. It's perfectly smooth. So it's a keeper. Apart from that, I haven't put the tube shields back on, but those will slip right back on. The chassis itself, the top side of the chassis itself here, I cleaned as best I could with some isopropyl, some Q-tips, some shop towels, and so forth. If I really wanted to make this look pristine, I would have had to actually strip the chassis of all its parts. And then, of course, I could have easily stripped and sanded this all down to bare metal and coated it or whatever. I didn't do that. It still looks much better than it did originally. The main reason I didn't want to take this radio totally apart was because frankly, I didn't want to disturb the IF cans, because those have the status, essentially the status of unobtainium. So if I didn't want to disturb those. Tuning capacitor pulley looks beautiful. I completely derusted it and painted it with actually the same paint I used for the chassis top cover, which you'll see later. And it works fine, and I can actually tune it like this. Obviously, there's no dial pointer, there's not even the tuning knob or control here yet. No stringing, nothing. But it does work, and I can certainly tune it manually by tuning the big wheel. Moving over the capacitors for just a second, the power transformer worked perfectly. All it needed cosmetically was a little bit of wire wheel, and then a nice coat of black paint. Makes it look absolutely beautiful. The main 3-section capacitor, if you recall, here was the original 3-section can. It's been replaced by 3 caps, of course, 2 47s and a 200 instead of a 100. The 247s replace two of the 40s, and the 200 replaces a 100. All of this at appropriate 200 plus volt at least, I forget. But I decided to salvage the diamond-shaped mounting plate into which the original can snapped into. It was rather corroded with green something corrosion, so I completely sanded it down to shiny bare metal, and so it's beautiful shiny. And the capacitors actually mount with their negatives soldered to this plate, which is of course ground, and you'll see that on the when we look at the underside. So the caps actually fit exactly how the real caps could have fit in the original can. Now, could I have taken this apart and basically emptied its guts and then had an empty can into which I could simply slip over here and it would look original? I suppose I could do that because it would fit. The capacitors actually do fit all nicely inside, but I'm not going to bother. As an aside, it would have been interesting if someone made... plenty of people make, brand new multi-section, well, not plenty of people, but CE Manufacturing and a few others make brand new multi-section caps if you want to replace them with perfectly good electrolytic originals. But no one seems to sell just the empty can. Into which you can put your own things or slip on or whatever. So no one seems to sell those. So anyway, the caps will just stay like this, and that's perfectly all right. So on this side, new fuse holder, obviously new polarized this time line cord. Here's the original rod antenna with the wire tie that's replacing the little plastic clip, because the original little plastic clip totally crumbled into dust. So this plastic clip here is probably ready to crumble into dust, but it hasn't yet, so that's why I haven't even replaced this really rusty screw. So here I simply used a wire tie and a little bit of electrical tape, just in case it seems, I don't know if it's necessary, but because this is insulated from the chassis, I thought, well, perhaps the ferrite rod works better if it's not actually electrically touching the chassis. So in a nutshell, that's the totally refurbished top side of the chassis in perfectly working condition. So here's the underside of the AJ21's chassis after the total refurbishment. We'll take a little tour of it. We'll start, I guess, with the power supply section. Again, the line cord comes in through its grommet. The hot side of the line cord goes straight to the center conductor of the new fuse holder. From there, the fuse output, the fused hot side, goes to a new terminal strip, which I added here. That goes to one side of this twisted pair black wire here, which is going to the power switch on the volume control. It comes back to this other terminal, from whence it goes to a PTC here, which limits inrush current. I added that just for good measure, since I had some. From there, it goes to one of the primary sides of the transformer. Other primary of the transformer goes to here, and then it goes back to the neutral of the line cord. So that's basically the line side of the AC input side of the transformer and wiring. The output side of the transformer has only two windings. It has the two red wires, which are the high voltage, meaning nominally 117 volts AC secondary. Normally that went to just an antique rectifier diode. I added yet another terminal strip, and now it goes into a suitably sized bridge rectifier here. The output of the bridge rectifier, one side, of course, the negative side goes to ground. Positive DC side of the bridge rectifier goes to this red wire, which comes into this terminal strip, yet another terminal strip, which now houses the two replacement power resistors, which form the B plus dropping resistors, as well as part of the filtering, the 330 and the 1K resistors. These were originally 1 watt resistors. They ran hot, and so I replaced them with brand new 2 watt resistors. And then here was what used to be the underside of the can, the 3-section can. Again, I kept its mounting plate. The negatives of the capacitors are soldered to that plate, which of course is ground. The positives go to white, blue, green, yellow here, where they should in the filter part of the power supply. This whole power supply section, B plus, has one output, which is this blue wire, which feeds all the plates and the rest of the circuitry. So a little bit of a digression regarding drifting resistor values over the years. These two are the two power resistors that I use in the power supply section of the AJ21, right next to the filter caps. And I got these, of course, from a distributor. These are 5%. There's a 1K and a 330 ohm resistor in the circuit. So here are the two that I'm using. If we just take a quick look at them, let's look at the 1K. So 1K, this comes out as 974 ohms. So what's that? That's about 2.6% low, but again, well within the 5% tolerance. If we look at the 330, let's put that on and see what we got. 327.6. That's actually very close. That's more like 1%, 2%, something like that. So again, well within their rating. And of course, these are 2 watt resistors to replace the 1 watt resistors, which were originally in the AJ21. Bring in, here are the original 2 resistors. These are the original carbon composition resistors. These are 1 watt resistors according to Heathkit. Notice they're bigger than the modern 2 watt resistors, but so be it. You can barely see brown, black, red, and of course 10%. But let's just take a quick look. These, of course, now are pushing, 60, 70 years old, something like that. So let's take a look at the 1K. 1K reads as 1,448. So 1,000. So this is nearly 45% high. So this is obviously not 10%. This is 45% off. So just to give you an example of why, why is it always the carbon composition resistors, and in particular the higher wattage ones, that drift way, way off over the years. So yeah, and let's take a quick look at the 330, also 10%, but 330 now reads 417, which is, let's do something quick, that's about 26% high. So yeah. So anyway, just a little bit of digression to show you that if you have, particularly the higher wattage carbon composition resistors that are 50 or 60 years old, they've probably all drifted significantly way up in value and should probably be replaced.
So here's the original schematic of the Heathkit AJ21's power supply section. It's really rather simple. This is exactly how Heathkit designed it. Obviously, I've made just a few modifications, which I'll talk about here quickly, which I showed you on the chassis. First of all, the entire purpose of this section is to take the 117 volts AC here and basically turn it into 110 volts or so positive DC, which comes out the top here and is essentially RB+. There are really no other outputs to this power supply other than the filament section below here. On the primary side, 117 volts AC, I inverted the fuse and the switch so that, first of all, I put a polarized line cord, and the hot side goes first to the fuse, then to the power switch, then it goes to a PTC, which limits inrush current, then through the primary winding of the transformer and back out the neutral side of the line cord. On the secondary side here, notice what's interesting is there's only two windings. There's the more or less high voltage winding, which is listed at 117 volts AC, which is really interesting because that's exactly what the primary side winding is listed at. So effectively, these two windings form just a little isolation transformer, which is good because we don't want a hot chassis. So it's very nice. It's very nice that this Heathkit, and in fact most Heathkits that I've ever seen, are transformer full and therefore not hot chassis. This originally got rectified by a rather antique rectifier, which I showed in my chassis discussion. I couldn't find a reference to its part number, but and it worked. It acted like a diode, but in the interest of reliability and just a little bit more smoothing, I replaced it, which is of course a half-wave rectifier, with a full-wave bridge. And the full-wave bridge simply takes the red and red secondary here, and then outputs positive and ground on its other side. On the filtering side, we of course replaced the electrolytic can with 3 discrete capacitors. The 100 microfarads became 200, the 40s and 40s became 47 and 47 because that's what I had. The 330 and 1000 ohm 1 watts became 2 watts and run actually much cooler, which is nice. On the secondary running the filaments, 6.3 volts AC. What's nice is all of the tubes are running in parallel rather than series, because each of the tubes, these are 6A, 6E, whatever's, except for the 12AU7, which has a split dual filament, which you can wire in parallel here for 6 volts. The 2 lamps I'll have replaced with brand new, of course, 47 incandescent bulbs. You probably don't want to replace these with LEDs because this is AC coming in. So anyway, I replaced them with number 47 incandescent bulbs, and I'm not showing it here, and I probably don't discuss it elsewhere, but I added 10 ohm resistors in series with each one of these just to slightly decrease the current voltage the lamps, both to increase their longevity to essentially infinite, and also to reduce the current load on the secondary here. I have no reason to believe that the secondary of this transformer, the filament secondary, is stressed in any way, but there's no harm in slightly reducing its current load, while also increasing the bulb life to essentially forever. So that's the power supply schematic.
Now moving over to the audio output section. Again, this has been pretty much redone, or at least recapped. The 4 tubular capacitors basically have been replaced. So these two guys, I believe, are .047s, which replace .05s. And this guy goes to the volume control. He's a .01, and then there's another .01, and these are polystyrene caps, which should do just fine. That's about all that was done here.
So this is the audio output section of the Heathkit AJ21 AM tuner. It's made up of a single 12AU7, which is really 2 sections, 2 triodes in one tube. The 12AU7 appears to be a very close relative of the venerable 12AX7, which actually I found in my Heathkit T4 and IT12 signal tracers. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the AU7 is just like an AX7, but with slightly less gain, I believe. Nevertheless, it's just 2 triodes in a tube. B plus comes from up here to the plates, and then the output of the fairly complex detector section comes in here on the left, obviously through a cap and into the grid of the first section of the 12AU7. From there, it actually goes into this L3 here, 2 caps, resistor going to ground. This is the whistle filter circuit, and it's coil L3. This is as designed by Heathkit, but not as received by me. So the idea of this, according to the manual, is to eliminate a 10 kilohertz beat, which happens if you tune the receiver to between 2 AM stations that are quite close together. I've not found that happening, and the reason why is because in mine this is missing. So the manual implies that this coil, 2 caps here and the resistor here going to ground. The manual claims that this is a notch filter. To me, this smells more like a low-pass filter, which is fine because we want audio frequencies certainly below 10 kilohertz. But nevertheless, it's a filter. On mine, this was totally missing. So the way I'll show how mine came is simply to overlay the schematic as I modified it to reflect how I received it. So in mine, the entire whistle filter is gone. It's not there. The L3 coil is missing. You'll see that in the chassis discussion earlier. And there is an extra red wire here which someone installed, obviously after the fact, to simply connect the 2 sections of the amplifier together. And that's why I colored this red, because it's a red wire on the chassis that someone added. But it does work fine. I've never encountered this 10 kilohertz beat, so I'm not going to worry about it because the radio seems to work without that whistle filter. I don't know if it was there and for some reason a previous owner of this deleted it, or why he would have deleted it, but it sounds like that's what happened. Apart from that, the AJ21 has 2 actual output. Obviously this is a mono AM receiver, has a fixed output here to an RCA jack and a variable output to the RCA jack. The fixed output simply comes straight off the plate through a cap off the first section of the amp, and there's your fixed output, which is presumably line level. The fixed output is irrespective of the volume control, so you'd use this to a power amp that has its own volume control. Then the other RCA jack is variable output, and you can use these two together if you want. There's no reason you can't. The variable output goes to an extra stage of amplification, although the output of this, if you peg the volume control at full volume, the output of this is actually very slightly less than the fixed output. But nevertheless, that's what it is. So this whole section is also, a pretty classic and simple audio output section.
The center part of the chassis is basically the RF section, the tuning and IFs. This is all disc capacitors, so these are probably all fine. The resistors, the half-watt resistors, they're probably fine. I've tested a couple of them. They're sort of almost within tolerance. I really don't want to mess too much with this section if I don't have to. And since it works, I'll leave well enough alone. And I'll just limit this for now, at least, to the power, the AC input and power supply section, and the audio output capacitors. And that's basically everything which was done to the underside of the chassis.
So here's where I digress once again, and you're probably asking, why are you showing me some sort of old Heathkit tuner? Well, because I want to make a point. This is what I think is the predecessor to the AJ21. This is the BC1A, also an AM tuner, also tube-based. But for some reason, I stumbled across its listing, and I pulled down its manual and schematic, and what I find amazing is that the schematic and circuitry is almost exactly the same, with just a couple of notable exceptions. So I thought it would be just worth looking at how the two are similar and different. So here's the schematic of the Heathkit BC1A, and I'm just going into it because I find it amazing how much of it is similar and how much of it is different, and it's frankly mostly similar. Starting at the power supply section, the power supply section down here on the lower left is essentially identical, with a couple of changes, the most notable of which is they have a rectifier tube instead of a solid state diode. So perhaps this was before solid state diodes with suitable current ratings became available. The filter section is essentially identical, with the exception that it puts out a higher B plus than the AJ21. Apart from that, it's exactly the same. Oh, it's missing a fuse on the AC. Well, just because. Everything else down here, the filaments are exactly the same. In fact, the rest of the tube complement is exactly the same. Two 6BA6s, 6BE6, and then on the output, 2 halves of a 12AU7. Nothing's changed. Nothing had changed there. Also notable is over here on the top left, we don't have we don't have a ferrite rod antenna yet. In fact, on this kit, Heathkit had you build an AM loop antenna, which you'd sort of hang somewhere external to the radio, or of course you could toss a long wire out the window. But perhaps ferrite rod antennas had not been invented yet. Apart from that, it's pretty much all the same. The audio output section is essentially identical, including this 10 kilohertz whistle filter, which again was missing from my unit, but it existed even before on the BC1A. Even the IF section is essentially the same. Even the complicated detector section, which I don't go into on the RJ21, with its two, in this case, solid state diodes, probably germanium, but I haven't looked. Those are exactly the same as on the AJ21. So I thought it would just be interesting to digress a little bit and show how the predecessor of the what I think is the predecessor of the AJ21 led to the evolution into the AJ21. Perhaps they even had, I didn't look, but perhaps they even had an earlier tuner which had a tube-based detector section as opposed to solid-state diodes here. And perhaps the AJ21 had a successor which was even more solid state. Would, hey, note at that point it would not need any tubes at all. But I don't think so. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this small digression.
And here's the AJ21's chassis actually powered and running with the speaker I'll be using whenever I want to listen to this radio. And of course, that's one of my T4. This is a T4 or the IT12 signal tracer. And of course, right now the chassis is not in its enclosure. There's no dial, tuning, control, or string yet, but I can tune it the old-fashioned way.
Oh, is that what you think to do it? Or is that what... Right out of the box. That's what the Mets have been missing over this 3-game losing streak. Tyro was...
Says that as a condition for receiving Medicare funds, hospital emergency departments must stabilize a patient.
The decision was visit Singapore. Pope John Paul II did it in 1986, and that was for a grand total of 5 hours.
So yeah, I can tune it just fine. I don't know how well aligned it is. I'll know that once I have the dial string and put that back on. And again, if I can, I will give it a slightly better alignment. Again, it all depends on the condition of the IF transformers and the tuning coil. It's still a little, you still hear a little static going on in the background there. That's because I didn't still put back the shields on the tube, and the underside of the radio still doesn't have its shielding on, or obviously it's not even in its case. So that should improve once the radio is all together. And by the way, this slide switch is the fidelity normal or maximum switch, which goes on the front panel. Its function is to either open up or tighten up, depending on this position, the IF bandwidth of the radio. And again, because this is a high fidelity AM radio, so they want you to get all the possible bandwidth if it makes sense. In other words, if you don't have adjacent AM stations, which I don't, you can open it up and get more of that lovely AM signal into the detector and amplifier. Down here where I am, right now I'm only picking up, a few strong AM signals on the loop antenna, because the building I'm in is pretty well shielded. Of course, the radio does give you the ability to hang a ground and long wire out from the back. There's a terminal for that. So here's our final top chassis view, completely reassembled into with the front panel, the dials strung, everything. So there's the tuning flywheel, brand new string. The pulley is fully strung. You'll notice I got new springs, and I actually put 2 springs instead of 1, because I found that was necessary in order to correctly balance the tension between rotating one way and rotating the other way. The other thing you'll notice, there's a really long tail on the string. And if I can suggest one thing, if you ever do this, is leave yourself a really long tail, because it'll make adjusting the spring tension that much easier. It's a bit of a pain. Apart from that, the shields are back on the tubes, and everything is ready to be buttoned up.
I wanted to add one last comment regarding the ferrite rod antenna. Of course, it's nice that Heathkit built it into the kit and into the chassis here, so you don't have to make an external loop antenna like I mentioned earlier. There is one disadvantage, and that is that the ferrite rod antenna is typically quite directional. In other words, if either end of the rod is pointing directly at the transmitter, it will tend to be null, show a null. In other words, it won't. The volume and gain will be significantly reduced, if not eliminated. So you want the rod to be broadside to the transmitter. Of course, as you're tuning around the dial, you don't really know where the transmitter is, so you might have to rotate the entire chassis in order to get an acceptable signal. So yeah, that seems to be one downside of this design.
So here's our AJ21 all buttoned up, and the exterior's been refinished. I'll talk about that. It's sitting right next to its IT12, which is acting as an amp and speaker. The case was refinished, repainted, the bezel, and the front bottom bezel as well. The dial indicator was pristine and just needed a light dusting. So we'll turn things on here, turn on the amp, and wait for it to warm up. I'll talk a little bit about how I refinished it. I've talked about the insides quite a bit already.
And said, we want you to grab this data on individual users. We want you to twist the algorithm so it benefits us. And I've talked to...
So for the main cabinet top, it was all rusty and in very sad shape. Normally I would strip it down to bare metal. I didn't do that this time. I just gave it a decent sanding to smooth it off, and then gave it a coat of the metallic paint that I use. Not for this. I used it for the T4 and some other equipment where I did strip it. But nevertheless, it came out looking pretty good. And just in case you're curious, this is actually the paint I used. And it gives it a nice metallic dark gray appearance. For the top bezel, again, that wasn't stripped down totally. That was just nicely sanded, and then a couple of top coats of the closest tan I could find it to the original, and it's very close actually. And that turns out to be this shell white Rust-Oleum satin protective enamel. As far as the bottom bezel goes, if you remember from the intro, it was looking kind of sad. The Heathkit logo had completely faded. The lettering was in okay shape, but the whole paint, and there was really no way of cleaning the paint properly down to color without sacrificing the text. So in the end, I had to sacrifice the whole thing and stripped it and repainted it again with the same tan color, of course, as the bezel. For the high fidelity AM tuner, that's actually a font on my Mac called Sign Painter. It's very close, but not identical to the original font of the bezel, but it's close. You can have a look at the intro to compare, and that is actually simply printed on sticker, transparent, self-adhesive sticker paper. Here's the sort of the worksheet I was using of it. This is glossy, it's transparent and sticky. Here's like 3 different font sizes that I was playing with to get exactly the right size. So the font isn't exactly the same, but it's close and certainly in the same style. And it actually looks transparent. You really can't tell that that's a sticker on top of just lying on top of the paint. The logo is something else entirely. That's actually an aluminum reproduction logo, which I found on eBay. There is an eBay seller which will give you logo badges, create logo badges for just about any piece of equipment man has ever conceived of. And they had this Heathkit one, which perfectly matched the Departed logo. I won't put a link in the description because links do expire, but simply Google Heathkit logo reproduction and you should find them. And finally, for the model AJ21, this is probably a little more apparent. This was a first attempt. This is actually just P-Touch labeling black on clear with a built-in font in italic. It looks okay, but I'll probably redo it using the transparent sticker material because the P-Touch material is much more visible. So that is that for our AJ21.
Power to mobilize people en masse suddenly had an example where they could say, look what TikTok could do with just one notification they can get.